There are some books that are laborious and slow, and you wonder when the compelling action will begin. But somehow you are slowly drawn into the story, and when you turn the last page, you are exhausted and drained because it has moved you mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The movie version of the book I have in mind has Susan Sarandon in the role of Sister Helen Prejean, and tells of her heroic moral courage as a spiritual advisor to Patrick Saunier on death row in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. Saunier is arrogant, sexist, and racist, and does not even pretend to feel remorse. He is to be executed by lethal injection and is now as terrified as he had been terrifying to the two teenagers he had killed. Do you remember the name or the title of the movie? You can shout it out even if I can't hear you. Dead Man Walking. Near the end, you see him led out of his cell along the corridor, limp and frightened, with shackles on his hands and his ankles, and he whimpers, "Will the injection hurt?" A stout officer leads a procession of people down a crowded corridor to the execution chamber and announces in a dispassionate voice, "Dead man walking." In the ancient world, a dead man walking was a leper. He had no reason to live any more. He might as well be dead. Some lepers lived in caves far from civilization. Some communities used vast quarries where the leper could claim a small space, and that pit was home. One could hang Dante's sign over the imagined entrance to hell. All hope abandon, ye who enter here. If they ventured out of their pit, they were required to wear torn clothing so that they could be readily identified, warning people to keep their distance and avoid them. And in case they were not noticed, the most abysmal humiliation was that they were required by law to loudly announce their despicable condition. Unclean, unclean. And if he did not keep his distance, this leper could be stoned. I remember as a child having the window seat on a bus with my parents at a crowded bus terminal in Trivandrum, South India. The station was crowded with people, some with suitcases on their heads, some dragging their produce or chickens, some selling their home-baked goods with the incessant wail, "Vada, vada," a kind of spicy donut. But there was one woman who caught my eye. She was very dark, a solitary pillar of stillness, staring into nothingness. She wore a half sari, and her clawed fingers around her little hand formed a cup. She was a beggar. She was toothless and emaciated, with bulbous nodules all over her face and body. And I nudged my mother. "What is wrong with her?" "She has leprosy. Look away." You see, she was a non-person, as good as dead. It seems every age, every nation, every community, every religion has its own particular lepers. Perhaps we feel they endanger us in some way. They're a threat to our life, our happiness, our cherished values, and we don't want to see them. As Baptists, we were the once despised victims to be exiled, and the early Baptists were regarded as a cult, and they fled from the hardliners in the Church of England and crossed the Channel to Holland, and with nothing to lose, they sailed to the New World. But they were not welcomed at Plymouth Rock, and Roger Williams and his followers fled to Providence, Rhode Island, to plant the first ever Baptist church in North America. Or I think of my first summer in Canada, working as a laborer as a summer job, and hearing people talk sneeringly about frogs and wops. And I learned that they were pejorative, put-downy terms for the French and Italians, and that somehow the English did not like them. They were the stranger, the other. In time they were assimilated into the general population and are not identified that easily as different. But not so with people who have black skin or brown or yellow or red. For the red man, Canada was home for 6,000 years. For a while he was romanticized as the noble savage and as everything that a true human being might aspire to become: pure and strong, lithe and handsome. But the greed and the possibility of great wealth and land was too much to resist. In most cases they were marginalized, stripped of what is rightfully theirs, and as we heard in the poem, their cries are muffled. Today people laugh at the drunken Indian crumpled in a doorway, or there is the black man or the Muslim. In some people's minds, they are the lepers of our time. And we can't blindly say marginalized people of color or whatever, racialized people, are all saints. In any population, white or racialized, there are bad dudes, criminals, of whom we need to be very careful. But there are many among them who are outstanding citizens, simply trying to make a living, and they're not given a fair chance. Let us go back to the leper in Mark's Gospel. Somehow he has forced himself into Christ's presence. There he is with his repulsive face and the look of a cornered animal in his eyes. One can only imagine how the crowds shrink back in panic. But Jesus is not alarmed by this brazen leper. He continues sitting, calmly teaching. And this leper cries out to Jesus in his anguish. He did not have much to lose. He was a dead man walking. He cries out above the indignant roar of the crowd, "If you wish to, you can heal me." Jesus was accustomed to interruptions. Life is filled with interruptions. And this man, the Christ, from the right hand of God, was deeply moved with compassion and stretched out his hand and touched the untouchable leper. He said, "I will be clean." The story in Mark underlines Christ's unbounded compassion. Let us never be in doubt of that. And these are days when we need compassion, whatever the issue might be that we are facing. We're coming to an end to the lockdown, but we're not quite sure what it means. We're nervous about the new variants that may threaten our lives and civilization, and we're tired of everything. What this passage says to us is this: Jesus cares. How many there are who need to hear that message. I'm thinking of a man in ICU struggling to hold on to life. Jesus cares. I think of a woman confused and broken-hearted, only sometimes in the vague mist of her mind, aware that her husband is dead of COVID. Jesus cares. Let me tell you of another woman, a member of our congregation, who cried out to God in her desperation, and he reached out and touched her and gave her strength, the strength she did not know that she possessed. Some of you will remember her, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Myrtle Blackwood Smith. She sat near the back of the sanctuary and often slipped quietly out the back door at the close of the service. She was always dressed modestly, and perhaps that is why she was not noticed. She had reached out to those around her, especially those of black heritage, got to know them and the names of their children, asked how she could pray for them. I had her funeral last summer, and I learned so much about her none of us knew. She was born in Montreal and was a superior student, but the principal of the school told her this: "Don't set your sights too high above your place in life. You're destined to be a nanny or a domestic helper." And she presumed otherwise. She wanted to achieve her CJEP, take Latin and other courses to prepare for university. And she prayed, and her father prayed, "Oh God, help us." And God reached out his hand and touched them, and gave him, the father, strength, the strength to challenge the principal. Hat in hand, this underprivileged black man visited the principal, and the principal was a sensible, thoughtful man, and he tried to reason with this balding old man, this father. He said, if she manages a high level of education, it would not do her any good. She would not find any reasonable job. She would only be frustrated and disappointed, and she would end up being a mother's helper anyway. But like the leper, he would not be turned away. The father said, "Does she have the marks?" "Oh, yes, she can manage that all right. She's a very good student, bright girl." "In that case," said the father, "admit her to the academic stream, if you please. And when the time comes, we will deal with the frustration." And this young Myrtle Smith graduated high school with honors. She was admitted to the University of Toronto, then to Osgoode Hall for law. She was the first black woman to be admitted to the bar in Ontario. She became the solicitor for the city of Windsor, then for the province in various capacities. There's a plaque that hangs in her honor at Osgoode Hall. There are many layers to that story, aren't there? It's a story worthy of Black History Month. It's a story worthy of a woman of prayer and of faith, of strength. It's a story that challenges us to help the helpless in their hour of need. You see, Christ's compassion is communicated in tangible ways only through us. Jesus said in Luke 6:36, "Be compassionate as your Father is compassionate." Compassion is more than cute slogans and a sentimental notion or sentimental high. Compassion is justice and mercy for all, for the black, the red, and yellow, and the white. Compassion reaches out a hand to those hollowed out by loneliness and isolation and injustice, the broken, the lonely, the disconsolate. Be the hand that touches them for Christ's sake.